Okay, I think we can get started. Okay, so welcome everybody. My name is Abbie Goldberg and I'm a professor of psychology at Clark University. And I want to welcome you here today to this very special event, which is being held to mark the publication of the Sage Encyclopedia of Trans Studies, which is edited by myself and Genny Beeman at Umass Amherst, who will be today's moderator. So the encyclopedia contains about 300 articles on a range of topics that affect or intersect with trans lives and experiences, such as the criminal justice system, trans people in sports, Stonewall riots, trans people in mental health, the trans pride flag. And this encyclopedia is really the first of its kind. And I think its publication, particularly in the time of COVID, is a pretty momentous event. And it really does mark a turning point for trans visibility and liberation, as well as pointing us to all of the work that has left to be done. So all of you today are going to receive an email following today's event with the links to entries written by today's panelists, as well as a flyer to send to your university or institution to their library. And that flyer will contain a discount code as well. So now I'm going to hand it over to Genny, who is going to introduce our fabulous speakers.
Thanks, Abbie. I'm Genny Beeman, the director of the Stonewall Center at Umass Amherst. The format for today is I will introduce the panelists, and each panelist will have 2 questions to respond to, speaking for 5 minutes to each question, and then we'll take questions from the audience. Please post your questions using the Q&A function. We're so fortunate to have an amazing group of speakers for this event. Starting out, we have Kylo Ratus, the cool Kylo Ratus. Kylo is a pioneer in the trans movement as an attorney, activist, public speaker, author, and professor. He is founder and director of the Trans People of Color Coalition, the only national organization dedicated to the civil rights of trans people of color. Kylo is also on the board of the National Black Justice Coalition, where he was board chair for 3 years and currently serves on the Freedom for All America board. He has served on numerous other boards and committees and helped craft legislation at the local, state, and federal level. He was the first out trans person to testify before the Senate. Next, we have the super Sasha Booker. Sasha is a senior attorney in the Washington, D.C. office of Lambda Legal, the oldest and largest organization dedicated to advancing civil rights of LGBTQ people. During her time at Lambda Legal, she has been involved in extensive federal and state legislative and policy efforts on a wide range of issues, including judicial nominations, criminal justice, policy reform, and healthcare initiatives. She is also litigating a number of cases expanding and solidifying federal civil rights protections for LGBTQ people. Before joining Lambda Legal, Sasha served as a staff attorney and policy counsel at the Transgender Law Center. She was the first openly trans person to be appointed to a state board in Oregon. We also have the keen Chris Hayashi with us. Chris has over 20 years of movement building experience. He has been the executive director at the Transgender Law Center, one of the largest organizations in the country advancing the rights of trans people since 2015. Prior to that, he was TLC's deputy director. Chris also has led 2 other organizations as executive director. He was executive director at Youth United for Community Action in California, which is a grassroots community organization for young people of color to empower themselves and work for environmental and social justice. Subsequently, Chris was the executive director of the Audre Lorde Project for 10 years. ALP is an LGBTQ plus group for people of color for community organizing, mainly in New York City. We're also pleased to have here the marvelous Mara Kiesling. Mara founded and has been the executive director of the National Center for Transgender Equality, the nation's leading political advocacy organization for trans people since 2003. She has led organizational and coalitional efforts that have won significant advances in trans equality, including the inclusion of gender identity in the Federal Employment Non-Discrimination Act from 2007 onward, and countless other federal and state legal wins. She's currently a leader in the effort to pass the Equality Act, which I'm sure she will talk about today. Mara also co-authored Injustice at Every Turn, the groundbreaking 2009 report of the National Transgender Discrimination Survey, and the report of the 2015 US Transgender Survey. Prior to founding NCTE, Mara worked for 25 years in social marketing and opinion research. And finally, no panel on trans rights would be complete without the stupendous Shannon Price mentor. Shannon is a longtime legal advocate for trans people. For the past 20 years, he has served as legal director of the National Center for Lesbian Rights, one of the nation's leading legal advocacy organizations for LGBTQ people. He has represented trans youth, elders, asylum seekers, employees, spouses, parents, athletes, students, conversion therapy survivors, and customers in civil rights cases across the country. That's a lot. He is the author of Family Law for LGBTQ People and an editor of Transgender Rights. He has also received numerous awards for his advocacy for LGBTQ people, including the Dan Bradley Award for the National LGBTQ Bar Association and the U.S. Department of Justice LGBTQ Pride Award. Welcome, everyone. That's a whole lot of great accomplishments to you all. So my first question for you all is this. Please discuss what your organization is working on now to advance trans rights under the Biden administration. And anyone can start, so who's going to go first? Just jump on in.
I'm happy to start.
Thank you, Sasha.
Sure. Yeah, and thanks everyone for joining. Really appreciate it. I don't know what I'm doing on this panel. Everyone except me is a legend in this movement. So I especially want to, hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn, but I just want to honor Mara, especially, who founded NCTE and has done so much great work for our community. When I was a little trans baby, she came to Portland and you really inspired me and showed me, the direction that this movement could go in. So just really appreciate everything you've done, Mara. And in answering your question, Genny, Lambda Legal's been working on, advancing trans rights and non-binary rights for, a while, even before the Biden administration. We'll continue to do that outside of the presidential administration, but specifically, what we plan to be doing and we're working on now is to continue to, repair the damage that's been done over the last 4 years. It's been an especially tough 4 years, as everyone on this call I'm sure knows, and there's a number of lawsuits that are still outstanding. I think we filed 8 of them just against the Health and Human Services Agency alone. With regard to trans rights, for example, there's a challenge that's still happening, challenging the Trump administration's action to try to eliminate protections for trans people in the middle of the pandemic and under the Affordable Care Act, non-discrimination protections. And so we're, litigating that, but we're also working on the policy end to, hopefully, build something much stronger. So it's about repairing the damage that's been done over the last 4 years, but to also think, proactively, obviously, because we want to come back, address issues that, we weren't able to address during the Obama administration, for example. Data collection, we've got some really solid data collection, but there's a whole lot more that needs to be done on that front. So there'll be a lot of work on that end as well. I mean, other issues, that are still outstanding are, for example, trans veterans still aren't able to access transition-related healthcare treatments for surgical care. And that's something we've litigated about in the past, but that's been put on hold. And we're confident that the Biden-Harris administration will, do the right thing and move forward with positive policy making in the next 3 years. They've already, indicated that that's the direction they're going to go in. So we're hopeful that we won't have to litigate anymore with the administration. So hopefully some of those things happen quickly. Other pieces of work that we're working on, I don't want to go too deep into the weeds, but there was a great Supreme Court decision last June, the Bostock decision, clarifying that what we've been arguing for, over 20 years, that sex discrimination protections in federal law encompass protections for trans folks. And that, court after court has agreed with us on that issue, except for the Trump administration, obviously. But the Supreme Court, had a really great decision. And so there's been a lot of thinking and a lot of work to make sure that that's becomes a reality for people. You know, that there's one thing, it's one thing to have the law, it's another thing to have the actual lived reality. So it's really important that, you know, we continue to advocate, you know, both through litigation out in the world, challenging, you know, not, discriminatory policies like the athlete bans that we're starting to see, you know, move forward. You know, using this important decision, clarifying that sex discrimination includes trans people, but also important to work with the Biden administration specifically to make sure that the different agencies implement federal law consistent with not just the Bostock decision, but all of the lower court decisions, you know, that have similarly held that, you know, trans folks are protected. Another issue area, and I won't go on because I know we're, you know, there's a whole lot we could talk about, but one really important issue that needs a lot more work is that we need to repair the courts. You know, the courts, as you mentioned in the intro, you know, I work on this and I've worked on it for the last 3.5 years, and you know, it's really horrifying to see, you know, because of some wonky things like the blue slip, which I won't get into, but you know, there's been ways that the Trump administration has abused process to pack the courts with really far right, ultra conservative judges, and it's just really important that a lot of work is done to make sure that the Biden administration, you know, brings forward judges that are demographically and professionally diverse and are able to be fair-minded constitutionalists. You know, sometimes we forget that these are lifetime appointments. These people are going to be, you know, making decisions, you know, for 30 plus years in a lot of cases, and so it's just really important that that they move quickly. And so we're working with the coalition here to make sure that there's great names being, you know, put forward and that they're moving quickly. There's over 100 vacancies now, you know, throughout the judicial system, the federal judicial system. So, you know, we're hopeful that that'll be something that will move quickly. There's a lot of work being done with the Bureau of Prisons. You know, there's, you know, trans folks and non-binary folks and criminal justice and prisons and jails experience horrific conditions in a wide range of issue areas. So there's a lot of work being done, you know, to with the Biden administration to make sure that trans folks in federal prison systems are safe, as well as the Department of Homeland Security. So those are some of the things that we're working on, you know, directly with the Biden administration, and happy to dig deeper and talk further about any of those issues, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Genny. I go next, is that all right? So Sasha, thank you. And you actually are a legend. Unless you're referring to age, then the rest of us are legends and you're not. So Sasha, thank you for that. Sasha covered a lot of the things that NCT is working on as well. You know, we do have a very clear, what's unfortunately called a blueprint for what we're going to do. And it covers all of the, well, you can't really see it on my iPad, but covers all the different areas that Sasha was talking about and some others that she didn't really have time to get into. Very importantly, we're also dealing a lot with presidential appointments. There were only about a dozen during the Obama administration, which was a pretty successful administration for trans people. This time we're going to lean a little harder on them. Right now, we've only had one appointment, and that's worrying us a little, and we're having conversations, but they're a little bit behind in a lot of areas. But what we do have so far is the first trans person ever confirmed in a position. That's Dr. Rachel Levine to be the Assistant Secretary of Health. And by the way, the Assistant Secretary of Health, or ASH, is really the top policy person at Health and Human Services. This is a significant place to have a trans person sitting at the table. And Dr. Levine is a super big hero of mine, and I think she'll kick ass. We also need to see trans people in roles we haven't seen them before. Federal judges. There are a few trans people who were pushing up the ladder to try to get federal judgeships, and the same with ambassadors from the United States. As far as we all know, there's never been a trans ambassador from any country to any other country, an openly out trans ambassador. So we're working on those kind of things, and also trying to get more trans people into the administration than even there were during the Biden administration. Our agenda covers a whole lot within the administration in all of the areas that Sasha talked about. But one thing I want to talk about that I think is the most important thing we're going to be pushing them to do, and that is to finally create a real and broad plan for addressing the violence against Black trans women in particular, but trans women of color in general. About 3 years ago, Attorney General Jeff Sessions actually called us up and said, we want to come in and talk to us about how we can help solve this problem. And we thought that was a little far-fetched, but it essentially came down to he thought maybe he should prosecute some more people. And that's not going to help. It's not going to help enough. What we have to do is a whole big government push around ending the stigmatization, the marginalization, and the criminalization that's causing the violence. It's a really complex thing. The first thing they're going to have to do is sit down with the people who are most effective. This can't be something that NCT or MARA is pushing alone. This has to be them talking to actual people who participate. But then it's a big menu of policies that have to happen. Yeah, there has to be some criminal justice reform. There definitely has to be some jails and prison reform and decreasing incarceration. But there also has to be things at the Department of Labor around job training, around economic opportunity. There's a lot in the Department of Health and Human Services that has to happen to make people feel that they can get jobs. And it just is across the whole government. And it has to be a holistic plan that we're going to be pushing soon for the Biden administration to really, really get down to. They're off to a really, really good start. No administration is ever going to be fast enough for all of us. That's really true. But this administration's off to a really good start, starting with day one. There's only a certain amount of things that a president can do on day one. And one thing President Biden did was issue an executive order that essentially said, hey, all of the places where there's sex discrimination laws, that should cover LGBT people, including trans and non-binary people. Let's make that happen. That has already shown up in a bunch of departments. We're going to see that more and more over the course of this year and next year and the following 2 years. This is the long game. This is a strategic game. But boy, did he get out of the blocks fast. Is that a sports term? I just used a sports term. That's fantastic. I'm not really particularly minded, but that's an important thing. And then I also just want to add our congressional agenda, our collective congressional agenda is pretty broad as well. Yeah, it includes the Equality Act, which would be such an important thing for all trans people. For instance, it includes in it non-discrimination protections in federal spending and federal programs. That's a remarkable tool that if we can win that, we will be able to get a lot more stuff across the government, from jails and prisons to lots of other things where the federal government has programming and discrimination won't be allowed. We have other things in Congress too, like trying to revise the Real ID Act to just take the word gender out of it. That would allow us to start advocating with state state governments to take sex and gender markers off of driver's licenses. Right now, they're required by federal law. They shouldn't be. And I know that's a slightly controversial thing and a very controversial thing for some folks among us. But the truth is, in my opinion, the damage done by having sex and gender markers on driver's licenses is a lot more significant than the advantages we gain by allowing it to be fixed in the ways we want it to be fixed. So that's a long-term project, but there's a legislative thing. There's also lots of legislative work around the TSA and doing national security with some dignity and with some rationality. So it's just not annoying, invasive, and dangerous theater. I'm going to pull over and stop there and hand it off to whomever is next.
Thanks, Mara. I think that's me. Hey, everybody. This is great. I really enjoyed hearing Sasha and Mara what both of you said. So, and I don't want to repeat the same stuff. One of the questions that's someone has asked is, how will the approach to addressing discrimination and violence against trans people take into account factors like race and class and other characteristics that reflect that not all trans people experience oppression the same way? So I really want to stress that we're NCLR helped start this new coalition called the LGBT Anti-Poverty Network, and that's one of the things we're really realizing more and more, that while it's important, it's critical, essential to have anti-discrimination protections that address sexual orientation and gender identity, that not all of the problems that our community faces fall neatly inside kind of an anti-discrimination framework. And just to take one example, there's probably more transgender people that go without health care because they can't afford it than because they're experiencing discrimination. There's a lot of discrimination. We need laws to address that. We need vigorous enforcement, but we also need to be pushing for more access to health care generally, so that everyone in our community, not just transgender people, but all LGBTQ people, have access, have health care in the first place. It's just one example. That's why we're really strongly supporting the push to get an increased minimum wage, which would be a huge boon to people in our community. So I think it's just important to remember that while we're thinking if our goal, which it is, I know, is to support and increase the health and well-being of everybody in our community, that we need to keep our eyes kind of on both of these frames: anti-discrimination, yes, but also just thinking about issues that disproportionately affect a lot of people in our community, and they don't come pre-packaged kind of in an LGBTQ anti-discrimination wrapper. I just want to mention too, since I work for one of the litigation groups, one of the things we're doing is like really coordinating all the post-Bostock cases that are bringing in federal sex discrimination claims in all kinds of areas: housing, healthcare, employment, schools, you name it. Working with all the other litigation groups to do that, and to make sure that all the private attorneys out there have the best arguments they can get, and to alert the Department of Justice under the Biden administration about cases where we want them to weigh in. And just one case that I don't know, some of you may have heard, that this is one of NCLR's cases. We had a bitter, terrible loss just yesterday. It's from the Sixth Circuit. It's a pending called Merriweather, where just horribly the Sixth Circuit held that it's okay that professors at public universities have a so-called free speech right or academic freedom right to misgender students in their class when they're calling on a transgender student. So that's horrible. And we'll be asking the Department of Justice to consider weighing in on that case, because we're going to ask the entire Sixth Circuit to rehear that case. The only other thing I wanted to particularly mention, a couple of other things, is one is like, it's so great, we're working with the State Department now to reinstate the focus. The State Department does this thing every year where they sort of analyze other countries and do country condition reports on countries across the world about how they're doing on human rights issues. And under the Trump administration, any attention to human rights abuses against our community, LGBTQ people, fell off the map. So we wanted them to put that back on the map, and just want the State Department generally in all of its activities across the globe to signal in every way it can that it really cares about the human rights of LGBTQ people. And super duper quick, before I kick it over to Kyler, just doing everything we can, work with the Department of Health and Human Services to really provide more support to families with LGBTQ kids, including, of course, families with transgender kids. All right, buddy, I'm gonna kick it to you, Kyler.
Super duper. I figured out how to unmic myself. It's good to be here, and thanks for this opportunity to talk about things we'll be focusing on in this administration. As has been pointed out, I think this is one of the better administrations. And I remember during an early administration that President Biden, getting used to saying that, was the first person that said this is the window of time for the trans movement. So with that framework, no person is perfect. We always have to hold people accountable, but I do think we do have with him and Vice President Harris two good people in office as far as things we're looking for. I'm not going to speak to things that have already been spoken about, except intersectionality, which were things that I was going to speak about anyway. because I don't think we have enough of it in the quote unquote movement. I think there has to be more work done to really move the ball forward, because the movement simply parallels the greater society in which we live. And within the movement, we have the microcosm of the world. And we just don't do enough race work. We don't do enough gender work. And we used to do that in the movement. And somehow we've changed the landscape of how we do the movement to transactions. And yes, and I'm a big one that's accused of always just focusing on the law and doing this, that, and the other. Trans people of color has always been an anomaly to people. And we kind of shift and change with the times and how we need to react, because we're not a major organization, but what we do is represent the interests of trans people of color. So what we will be doing is making sure more trans people of color voices are heard, and we've done that. We've done that traditionally by partnering with some of the groups, and we'll continue to do that to do the work. But as people saw this year, there were 10,000 Black trans people that showed up in Brooklyn for a march. And that's the power that you will be seeing wielded, because, and that it used to be by 2050, you would see the browning of America, but that's now been moved to 2030. And you will hear these voices come together collectively and to demand things that impact people of color. And as my colleague who just spoke, and it's, we have to start looking at things that don't fall in the neat boxes. And I've always said that in this movement. And as Malcolm X would say, the chickens have come home to roost. Poverty is a huge issue in our movement, and it has to be looked at and addressed and calculated in all these factors. And we really missed the boat in doing that. You'll be seeing more organizing around that. Sustainable and living housing, number one, for our movement. We have, just besides children, we have adults that need housing. And we're talking about people of color. And we're not just talking about Black people because I'm Black, but a great amount of them are Black, because in this country, this is the heritage and history of our country, whether we want to own it or not. It's the truth. And then the other people of color that we dismissing, like right now that we're in the Asian moment, like we didn't know that was coming, of how we disrespect Asian people in this country. And we haven't even brought up Native American people who are starving on the reservation, that we keep pushing them off the reservation that we promised them, that we still on their land, that we don't own, we're on Native land, and disrespect all the cultures and privilege of Native land. And we can go on with how we're treating other people that are brown in this country. And we treat all brown people like and including in the movement, like we're not humans, like we're breakable and indispensable. And that has to stop within this movement, because I watched this movement do what it's doing now. We're putting Black leaders in, but we still don't deal with the structural and systemic racism. And so that's what TPOC will be continuing to focus on and emphasize, while our peers don't get that. It's like you can put all the Black leaders or brown leaders in place, but if you don't deal with the structures, you're still gonna have them and you're still gonna miss the people. And so that's what we will be doing, and forming coalitions with the brown and Black groups that service our people, that have been servicing our people, whether they've been LGBTQ or T in the groups. Because while they may talk about us bad at church, they still feed us and house us. And so we're going to be educating those people, and we're going to still be educating LGBTQ people that there's racism within this community, and we need to deal with it and bring it out and talk about it. We can't just hire Black leaders and put them in place and put them in as mouthpieces, and hire certain kinds of Black people we want to work with, and certain kinds of Asian people we want to work with. And the ones that talk out, we don't want to hire those people. So I probably have gone past my 5 minutes or whatever, but we have to deal with race. And until we deal with race in this movement, we have not moved. And to Kylo Ratus, the 20-something-year-old person that joined this movement, we still have not moved. So that's what TPOC will be doing. Oh, it's Chris Hayashi's turn. Chris, to you.
Thanks, Kyler. It's great to be here with everyone. And before I get going, I saw that someone had put in the chat question. There's a couple of questions in the chat around the anti-trans legislation happening at the state level. And I'm assuming that we'll have some time to talk about that later, because it's definitely important. And there's definitely some key strategies I know we're all moving to fight back against those. So in terms of priorities for TLC, for the Transgender Law Center, the first thing I'll start out with is that one of the things that we launched last year, and we kind of launched in full just about a month ago, is the Trans Agenda for Liberation. So this is a blueprint, a guidepost for trans movements, for movements broadly. It was created by a national coalition of primarily Black and Brown trans leaders, primarily Black and Brown trans women. It's a combination of issue analysis, concrete policy recommendations, and calls to action, whether it's to religious institutions, to the broader movement, or to foundations. And to what other folks have spoken to, I just want to raise up the first pillar, which is Black trans women living and leading fiercely. This pillar was created by Black trans women and femmes, and it lays out solutions by Black trans women and femmes to specifically address the violence and murders of broadly of trans people, specifically of trans women of color and Black trans women and femmes. So this is really our guideposts and our priorities as we move forward. I encourage folks to check it out. Some other priorities that I have that I wanted to raise up, in addition to what other folks have shared, is this is definitely a time to reimagine public safety, to call for decarceration, and to call for sex worker rights. We saw over the past year, as Kyler spoke to and others have spoken to, the uprisings that happened all across the country and the globe in response to the continued murders of Black people. And we know that trans people, particularly Black trans women and femmes, continue to be murdered at astronomical rates. So we're calling for divestment from police forces, for an end to cash bail and pretrial detention, to a ban on solitary confinement, to a repeal on laws that police and target the homeless and those living in poverty. Other folks have raised up the importance of us prioritizing poverty and economic justice in our movements, and to really redefine sex work without criminal stigma. So to really push for the decriminalization of sex work. We also think it's important to prioritize the needs of people living with disabilities, particularly in this time of COVID-19 and the global pandemic. We are seeing the ways in which decisions are being made about who's worthy of life, who's worthy of care, and who's not. And we know that that disproportionately is going to impact people with disabilities and always has, as well as folks at the intersection of people of color, Black folks, women, trans folks with disabilities. So we need to continue to raise up that issue and really prioritize investing resources in community needs assessments, in community-based solutions, in health and wellness solutions for folks living with disabilities. The third area that I'll lift up is that for years, TLC, along with other organizations such as Familia Trans Queer Liberation Movement, the Black LGBTQ Migrant Project, Mi Gente, have been calling for an end to trans detention. We know that trans migrants in detention face horrific violence, harassment, discrimination, and we know that people have been murdered by ICE. Roxana Hernandez, Joanna Medina, and we are calling for an end to trans detention. If there was any time for us to double down on that, particularly during this time of COVID, when folks in prisons, in jails, and detention are particularly vulnerable and are the least likely to be receiving healthcare and preventive support, it's now. The other area that we really want to prioritize is the ways in which we know that trans young people in schools face horrific amounts of violence and harassment and discrimination. And we also want to raise up the ways in which trans young people also face harassment and abuse by police in schools. Nationally, trans young people, particularly Black and brown youth, have been calling for police out of schools. And we saw over the past year, campaigns that have been waged for years have been won. So we need to continue to push for that. We need to push for police out of schools all across the country and really raise up the leadership of trans young people themselves. And the last area that I want to raise up, I know other folks have talked about healthcare and healthcare continuing to be a need for our communities, is this is also really a time where we need to look at the ways in which trans people living with HIV, many of whom are Black and brown trans women, look at the ways in which people are criminalized. So we are calling and pushing for an end to the laws that criminalize HIV. So to raise up that there are laws that criminalize people living with HIV in many states across the country, including Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, Pennsylvania, and Texas. And we know the ways in which that disproportionately impacts trans folks, Black and brown trans women, and it results in even more people being incarcerated. And it's beyond time for us to repeal those laws. So I'll close with that.
Thank you for that, Chris, and thank you everyone for some really fantastic responses. I just have one additional question before opening up to audience questions, and that is a sort of visionary question. Where do you hope trans rights will be in 4 years from now? And I'll start with Sasha.
Great, thanks, Genny. I'll make this brief because I know people are probably itching to throw out some questions for us. So I think one thing that I'll talk about that's a little outside my lane is that I feel like there's a drastic need to humanize trans people across the board. I mean, Laverne Cox is, we're all familiar with Laverne Cox, but unfortunately, I think that we need we need some kind of breakthrough, like an Ellen breakthrough or a Will and Grace breakthrough or something where there's a character on TV that people can relate to that is not a victim, but is somebody that is lovable. So that's a little outside my lane, but I just feel like there needs to be I would love in the next 4 years to see a little bit of a more intentional communications strategy of humanizing trans people, because there's so much mythology and fear about our existence and our lives that I feel like the right wing really preys upon that, with people that aren't familiar with trans people and don't have, it's different than the LGBT community because we're about 1/10 of the size, and so it's really hard to do that work. So it'd be great if the large LGBT groups like us would spend a little more energy humanizing and just having more. That's why it's so important, as Mara mentioned earlier, to make sure that there's folks in the Biden administration that are forward facing, that deconstructs some of the mythology that's out there. So I'd love to see that. I think that one thing I would really love that's already been mentioned is that, about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a lot of work being done on criminal justice reform. And in my opinion, my humble opinion, that is kind of wilted, unfortunately, in some ways, for prisons and jails and in detention, and not with GLC and a lot of other groups, but I just would love to see more infusion of energy and resources into that work specifically. Non-discrimination protections are great, and we should continue to work on them, but I would love to see a pivot in the next 4 years to that work because of the horrific conditions that trans people and non-binary experience in prisons and jails. And lastly, I'll just tag on to what's already been said. I feel like there's such a rich opportunity for us to think more intersectionally specifically about legislation and litigation both. When we think about writing bills, non-discrimination provisions or whatever, we should think beyond gender identity and sexual orientation. We should be thinking about immigration status. We should be thinking about, the things that, if you want to build a coalition, if we want other civil and human rights movements to recognize the importance of our work in our lives, it's important that we recognize, the intersectionality of all of our identities and to bring in some of that thinking. Some of that's happening. I'm really excited about it. There's a couple of cases that we have at Lambda Legal that have, thought deeper about bringing in disability issues into our litigation and legislation, but I just would love us to collaborate more and maybe create like a think tank or something along those lines that really starts to dig deep into, you know, what that actually might look like. You know, I can only speak to the policy and the legal aspect, but I think that there's, you know, really a rich opportunity to think about voting rights and immigration rights and so many other issues that we just, you know, usually don't really consider when we're, you know, embarking on some of these initiatives that we get into. So I will stop there and thank you so much.
Yeah, Sasha, I think that's right, and that really mirrors what other folks have been saying. You know, Shannon, you brought up the notion of healthcare and it being and the difference between discrimination and poverty. You know, our U.S. Trans survey shows that we asked people, if you needed to see a medical provider in the last year, did you go? And if you didn't go, why not? And 23% of the trans people in the survey said they didn't go because they were afraid of disrespect or discrimination. But 33% said they didn't go because they couldn't afford it. And we always need to remember that. It depends on who you are and what day it is, what's the most important issue for you. There are so many issues that are life and death. You know, Chris talked about things, you know, the immigration and detention is a life or death issue for a lot of trans people. Racism is a life or death issue for a lot of trans people. And trying to put together the movement that looks at all of that is a work in progress and going beyond our movement. You know, the way we do, the way that people in the United States do policy work is changing pretty dramatically. You know, democracy is at stake. Whether you think democracy is, you know, has met its promise or not, and I think most of us don't think so. It's also on super shaky ground. We have to be worried about things like voting and money in politics and things like that. So trying to have a more holistic movement, I think would be good. I think we've moved kind of far in that. And Sasha, you're probably right. You know, the prevalence of issues kind of goes up and down. And that's a problem. Like if we're doing less criminal justice and jails and prison work than we were before, we collectively or we NCTE, that's a problem. And so I think we just have to keep thinking bigger, more intersectionally, and more broadly. Shannon, your turn.
Okay, cool. Well, I love this question about what do we want to see in the next 4 years. And I just want to mention one thing, but it's so near and dear to my heart. What I hope is that 4 years from now, we have completely transformed the way we as a movement think about transgender youth issues. And that is, in particular, I really hope that we can get away from this model we've all been trapped in for a way too long time, where we see, like, we think of transgender children and kids as like little adults and just think of them in isolation from their families and communities. And that has got to change. It is really not an effective way to go at issues affecting young people, because they are not little adults. They critically need their families and their communities. Most, you know, the model that we've had for way too long, which was the main message we have to tell young people who are dealing with family rejection or problems at school, is just like, try to hang on, and when you're 18 you can move somewhere else. Like, that's a really terrible, ridiculous message, and we need to massively increase the energy, the resources, the intention that we give to families with LGBTQ kids, including particularly transgender kids. It needs to be across the board, racially and religiously diverse families. We just need a whole transformed mindset about that. And while it's so important to create resources for transgender kids, the appallingly high number of transgender kids who end up homeless or in the so-called juvenile justice system or in the child welfare system. God help them, because these systems are brutal and terrible and cause enormous harm to all young people who are in them. No young people should be in these systems. We've got to, while we continue to advocate for good policies in those systems and more support for the kids in those systems, we need to keep our kids out of those systems. So we need to really flip the way we're looking at these issues and working on them and thinking about them. We need, the same way we have a prison abolition movement, we need a child welfare system abolition movement and a juvenile justice system abolition movement. And there is one. There's an up-in campaign to abolish the child welfare system as we know it, and LGBTQ people need to be an active and big part of that campaign. So if you don't know about it, I really urge you to learn more about it. I'll stop there and kick it back over to Kyler.
Wow. It's hard to imagine in 4 years, but I would like, something that's already been said that I think is true, and Sasha said it, the humanization of trans people. I think that was something that was very effective, important in the gay, now the queer movement. And I worked at HRC and watched Elizabeth Birch work that and make it done. And that was the Wheel of Grace moment. I worked there during that time and watched our gay sticker change from, I forgot what it was, and we went to the equal rights symbol. Not that I'm supporting that's what we did, but that's what happened. And that was a huge moment in history. But the gay movement was different. And I actually have been on a ton of panels and webinars the last couple of weeks talking about it. And I can say to people in that moment, remember when people told you to leave your baggage at the door, and they would walk you out of the meeting, and then we did the work. And that hasn't happened in the trans movement. So there's so much stuff going on at meetings, and I'm always ready to take the bullets. I've been taking bullets for years, and that sounds horrible, but it's the truth. And that's what they are. So I'm ready to take whatever people have to throw at me for saying the truth. But we bring our dysfunction with us to do the work. And you couldn't do that anymore in the gay movement. People would walk you right out of that meeting. And when I say that to people that are part of that movement, they remember those times, because we had the same dysfunction in that movement. But when you brought it to that meeting, they would walk you right out of there, and they'd say, oh yeah, but here's a therapist card, and I'm here for you to support you after the meeting. And we have to bring that responsibility as trans people to these meetings when we're ready to do the work, because that's one of the ways we're going to propel forward. And I would love to see us get there, because we can have that Will and Grace moment or that Ellen moment, just because I always continue to say when I give speeches, we teach people how to treat us. And a therapist tells us that individually. So we're teaching people how to treat us by the way we treat each other as trans people. And there is some truth to that, because I actually just did a webinar to a corporation, and they said, wow, we like because I don't go out with the victim mentality, because I'm a child of slaves. And, that's the truth and the reality. So people say, why are you don't bring that whole victim thing? Because I could bring that, but it's like, my life is better than their life was, no matter how hard it is now. And some people on this call know how hard it's been, and they've been there for me. And I have never shown everybody how hard it's been, because you'll never know, because they taught me to not let people know. You stand with your head up proud, and you do what you have to do to make it work. You make lemonade out of lemons. But however, they had it worse than I did. So I would say that, and I think we'll get some functionality, and we will get everybody's participation in the movement. And that's what I would also like to see, is everybody's participation within this movement. And I've been happy to work on the trans ban and getting, the largest employer of Black people in the country is the US military. But yet all we ever see soldier-wise in anything are white soldiers. And it's like, but I've been digging out the brown and black soldiers who are there, because where do we go when we get in trouble? And I know that from being a lawyer, because I've worked out many deals with prosecutors to get people out of town and keep their records clean. It's like, hey, I work out this deal, they're going to go to the military, because that's what we do as poor people too. And that's bringing that lens of all the intersectionality. It all can work together, because it did in the gay movement that has propelled itself and has advanced from the trans movement. And so we have to learn from other movements. And that's how we grow, because that's how the gay movement did it. That's how the women's movement did it. That's how the Black movement did it. They didn't just look at it and it just come out of the sky. So all this intersectionality can work together and advance us. So I would like to see some more of that. And then we get the youth in and take care of them. And then we're back to right, these prisoners that are dying and being killed and raped and abused that we have just ignored for the last 8 to 10 years, that we have not done any of that work in, that I still take cases on and do and take pro bono and then take 20 other jobs to pay the bills. We have got to address these issues, and they can be done holistically and they can be done in tandem, because we are losing too many people. Besides the 50% suicide, we are losing them in the systems, which I agree, I tell people to stay out of if we can, but we have to get our people out of the systems, because people are putting our people into the systems. And if we don't take care of them, who will take care of them? So we can do this, people. It is doable. So, and it is doable within 4 years, and we don't have to rely on other people. We can do it now. Let's get together and do it. And we have a favorable administration. It's our framework of thinking that thinks we can't do it. It's doable.
Thanks, Kyler. Absolutely. Definitely for TLC, the incarceration and the horrific conditions that trans people face in prisons, jails, and detention are a major priority. So thank you for raising that up. This is a great question. So I'll start by saying that, you know, thanks to Black and brown women, thanks to Native communities, thanks to disability justice organizers, thanks to folks in the South, right? Trump is out of office. So we have a less hostile administration, absolutely. And thinking towards the next 4 years, I think it's important that we, however, do not sleep on the fact that the forces that allowed Trump to be in office, the forces of hate, intolerance, white supremacy, still exist. And they are stronger than they have ever been. We can just look to the onslaught of anti-trans legislation across the country. We can just look to the recent murders in Atlanta of Asian women massage workers. We know that these forces are as strong as they have ever been, and we need to continue to move forward strategies that really fight back against these forces of violence, hate, and white supremacy that are clearly not just here in the US, right? But it's a global movement that we have to contest with. So I will also say that while 2020 was horrific and so much harm was caused and we lost so many people, that I think it's critical that we raise up also the powerful and beautiful opportunities, wins that we also saw during 2020, because I think it's critical that we, not as the COVID-19 pandemic perhaps becomes a bit more manageable, and as we are no longer under a Trump administration, that we don't just return to how things were before. Last year, we saw people rise up all across the country. We saw the call to defund the police and invest in communities become a national conversation. We, with other organizations, put together a letter. Over 175 LGBT organizations signed on to a call to defund the police and invest in communities. This is a moment that we have not seen before. We also saw in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, you know, trans people, particularly Black, Indigenous people of color, trans women, and trans people did what we have literally always done, right? we knew that if we didn't look out for each other, that others likely wouldn't. And we unfortunately saw that happen. So trans people all across the country organized so that our communities had food, housing, access to healthcare, access to preventive supplies, primarily led by Black trans women. House of Tulips, Brave Space Alliance in Chicago, My Sister's House, like so many organizations, just making sure that our communities lived, right, and survived through 2020 and the global pandemic and all of what 2020 was. And those are things that our communities have always done and did them even more so and more powerfully during what was and continues to be a global crisis. So, you know, as I think about the next 4 years, I know that our movements are actually stronger than we have ever been, despite facing ongoing attacks, ongoing violence, harassment, discrimination, and just lack of what we need to survive and thrive. And my hope is that trans organizations, particularly those led by Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities who have done so much, particularly during the last year, that we get the resources, support, and infrastructure that we deserve and that we have always needed, for our communities to survive and thrive. I also hope that we continue, as other folks have spoken to this, continue to build cross movement. If there's anything we learned from 2020, that we need to be working in coalition and partnership with other movements for which we are a part, whether it's climate justice, whether it's immigrant rights, whether it's racial justice and racial equity. Because I saw too often that if we were not there, we were not spoken of, we were not included. And so that's so critical for us to be building with those spaces, because it literally, and we saw this and we continue to see this, like literally our people's lives depend on it. And then the last thing that I'll say is that I do not think that we should be returning back to how things were before. There is an opportunity right now for us to make bold demands, right? We can say we need to end trans detention. We need to abolish ICE. We need to defund the police. We need to be leaning into those bold demands and not backing up from them because we are now in a less hostile administration. We need to lead with visions of what our communities need, of what we know. Like we know the strategies, we know the solutions, we know what will actually make our communities' lives better, right? And that we need to, this is a time to lead with those and not put those on the back burner for when we can come back.
Wow, some amazing wisdom. Thank you all. I'll now open up to audience questions. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A function. And panelists, don't feel you have to answer every question. We're not going to get to every question that's asked. We'll try to get through as many as possible. Bunch of questions in regards to the anti-trans state laws and what the hell we're going to do about trans women athletes not being able to compete, about trans youth not having access to healthcare, to the Arkansas law allowing medical providers to deny treatment to LGBTQ folks. Anyone to address what we should be doing around those, or what you all are doing around those questions?
What was the question again? I'm sorry.
What the hell we're going to do about the anti-trans state laws?
Oh,
what is being done?
Got you. Well, I think Mara, you want to go first? Go right ahead.
Go ahead, Kyler, if you want to.
I just was hearing the question. Go right ahead.
Well, you know, it's a problem. It's a problem. It will be eventually, I think we'll eventually figure out how to do it better. We're going to win most of the states, but that we're losing any of them at all is just horrible. that these bills are even being introduced is sending a message to kids that is just absolutely shameful. And honestly, I don't think we have a sufficient grip on it yet. This seems to be something that our people have been able to try to get a toehold on. We will figure it out. We will resolve it. But right now it's really hard. And I think most of our organizations and most of our people are trying to figure out how to do it. Yeah, so I'll say that.
Yeah, this is a crisis. I just want to jump in. Y'all, this is an absolute crisis. I mean, we're under attack. Trans kids are the focus in a way that is new, is really scary, and is working. I mean, yeah, like we went through this with the bathroom bills, but only one state passed the bathroom bill. We're already way past that with these trans sports bills, and an even scarier class of bills that actually makes it a crime, a felony for doctors to provide transition-related health care to minors. I mean, this is about as serious as it gets. I hope every single person on this, listening to this, makes a pledge to do something to help us beat back these bills. I mean, that usually means calling your state legislators or plugging into whatever efforts are going on in your state. But this is like a major wake-up call to us that there is a huge orchestrated backlash going on to the progress that we have made around trans rights, and we've got to get super serious about responding to it. And that means many things. One of the things it means, I saw a question in here from Lee Badgett about this, is we have got to do a bazillion times better job at learning how to talk to people who don't already agree with us and who don't already understand transgender identity. We've got to get better at talking to conservative people in this country. We are terrible at it, and it is a huge weakness. And the people who are paying the price for that, failing on our part right now, are children, our transgender children and their families. So that's my, sorry to get up on a soapbox about that, but it's just really concerning.
And no, and thank you, Mara and Shannon. And why I didn't hear the question was because I was responding to a report on that exact question or issue. So just to emphasize what Mara and Shannon are saying, it's a fire. We've got to put it out. And I just want to back both of what they're saying. And that's why I didn't hear the question, because I have a reporter calling me about this issue. Yeah. So just echoing what they said.
And I can chime in too. I don't want to message people to death here, but I think it's really important. It's not messaging, it's just the truth that, trans athletes, there were 60,000 trans athletes who are eligible to participate consistently with their gender identity. And they've been able to do so in states with non-discrimination protections for many years, and this idea that somehow trans girls are going to ruin women's sports has just never, been the case in any of those places. So there's never been a trans woman who's competed in the Olympics. This idea that somehow, it's a boogeyman that's being raised, and this kind of goes back to this issue of humanizing trans people to some degree. I think it's really important to keep reminding people that these are human beings and these are children. On the legal front, I think it is important to remember too that what this is about is excluding trans people altogether from participating. A trans girl is not going to participate on a boys' team. A trans girl is a girl, and what these laws do is they prohibit her from from participating altogether. And and that's not me saying that. That's a Trump-appointed judge in Idaho in a preliminary injunction decision saying that. He equated it to before marriage equality. He equated it to people making the argument that, well, a same-sex couple can still marry an opposite-sex person, so they still can get married. So that's him talking. So that's not me. But it is a really important point that this is excluding them altogether from participating, and that clearly violates Title IX. So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Sasha. Definitely echo everything that folks have said. I mean, I feel like this should be a priority for the LGBT movement, and it should be a priority in that it should be resourced, it should be supported. And, you know, I don't think we're seeing that as much as we should be. It also should be a priority for all movements who oppose the increased criminalization of communities, because we know that these laws that are about criminalizing people for providing trans care, for providing life-saving care, that ultimately they will most be used against Black and Brown communities. So this is really a issue that all movements should be prioritizing and taking up. And the other thing I'll add is that we also know, right, that like this is a culmination, and it's definitely worse than we've seen before, of years of the conservative right using trans communities as a wedge, of using attacks against trans people as a way to build towards rolling back rights for so many different communities. So we know that this is part of at this point, multi-year strategic attack by the conservative right. And then the last thing that I'll say is that I think it's really important in this time of this onslaught of legislation, all of it targeting trans children and young people, that while I absolutely agree with Shannon that we need to be thinking about trans young people and children within a kind of holistic space, right? Of like family, of community, of friends. And I also think what we need to see more of is the voices and leadership of trans young people themselves, who are also organizing, are fighting back against the legislation in their schools, in their states, and have been for some time. There are incredible trans youth leaders all across the country who have been organizing, who have been fighting back for many, many years. And particularly, I think, raising up and centering the voices of Black and Brown trans young people who we know, again, we know will bear the brunt of any of this legislation that passes. But we also know it matters if it passes or not, but that the harm that will be caused against trans young people is regardless of if it passes, right? The harm of hearing just ongoing anti-trans rhetoric and messaging in their states, in their cities, in their schools because of this legislation, we know that happens regardless of if this legislation passes. So one thing I just want to raise up is that TLC has a partnership with GSA Network, Gender Sexualities Alliance Network, which is a national queer and trans youth-led organization, for a project called Truth, which is a trans youth-led national organizing project. And that project has been working to bring together trans young youth leaders from the states facing anti-trans legislation to really raise up the voices, the needs, and the leadership of trans young people themselves, who we know are the ones who are most impacted by this legislation. So I think that it's really critical that we continue to center and raise up the voices and leadership of those most impacted by this legislation.
So we have a bunch of questions related to schools, both K-12 and higher education. I'll just throw them a bunch out there. Is there any hope to get the federal government to stop requiring colleges to submit their data as MNF and to recognize non-binary people? Are we going to have some new guidance around Title IX on the K-12 and college level, and to be able to give students at Christian colleges some rights and not allow colleges to simply opt out of Title IX?
Genny, before we answer that, can I just tell folks, I think people might be interested to hear this. I just got word that we just won in South Dakota. There will not be a sports bill in South Dakota this year. So we are winning some of them. It's not enough, but still there have been anti-trans youth bills in South Dakota every year for 6 years now. And it's the same, can't use that word, it's the same person doing it. It's the same legislator over and over again. And trans kids in that state understand that their legislature, their governor is against them. Even though we escaped barely this time, it's still a big deal. But remember, we are still winning some of them, and that's really good. And it's helping us understand better how to beat all of them. Now, that being said, does anybody else want to start on the education?
Do you have any intel?
About
the education from the secretary?
Yeah, the Title IX stuff. I actually don't know personally about the non-binary reporting in colleges and universities. I'm actually thinking maybe Jenny might know that as well as here. I don't know, but I don't know much about that. But so in around 2013, and some school administrators, its principals, school districts, et cetera, asked the Obama administration for some guidance on how to properly treat trans folks or trans students. And that's what the Obama administration was responding to when they created the guidance. And it was guidance, it wasn't law. I mean, it's a little weightier than if I give you guidance, but it was just guidance. And it was about how schools can properly treat trans students so trans students can learn in a healthy environment, and so that the schools wouldn't be sued in violation of Title IX, which is discrimination in school law, basically, and particularly around sex discrimination. The Trump administration took that guidance away. In 2017, about 2 weeks after Attorney General Sessions came into office. It was one of his top priorities and they took it away. I think we will see more guidance from the Biden administration, but really importantly, because of the Bostock decision and because 4 years have gone by, it's not as simple as just doing it like that. They need to work with some of our groups here to make sure they include everything. They need to work with parents and students and educators to get the guidance right. As impatient as I am about all this stuff, I understand that 2 months in isn't, we're not even out of the first 100 days yet. It very much fits in with the president's executive order on making sure that sex discrimination laws do protect us and having every agency do an analysis of that. So I think we will see it. I don't think I would want to posit a time frame for it.
And I'll jump in because I got to work on the Obama regs, which are guidelines, and we did work. We added stuff at the end, of course, to make sure everything was written out to give guidance with Secretary Lehman at the time of education. And we did want to tie it down because we didn't know what administration was coming in. And then when we did want to make sure that it was clear to give schools guidance. And so we try to wrap as much in it as possible. And so, but as Mara said, it was of course taken away during the last administration because they considered it law rather than guidance. And then schools began to opt out immediately because they couldn't opt out before. But I agree with Mara, it's too early in because changes would need to be made even to the Obama stuff now that we've warped however many years. I was going to say 8, but that's too many years. 4 years ahead, now 5 into it. And that definitely the administration needs some time. It's 100 days in, clearing up a few disasters, would we say, and trying to save the union. And definitely, I do think that they will work with some of the groups and hopefully get some information and then work as they did last time over time to come up with Title IX guidance. And I definitely see that would happen with this administration without a problem.
And I just throw in, they're also, they're juggling a lot at the Department of Education, I think, because there was some really crappy rulemaking with regard to sexual violence standards that were, promulgated in the last administration that they're going to be focusing on as well. But hopefully they'll, take some time with this because, as we saw during the Obama administration, whatever comes out of the administration is likely to face a legal challenge. And it's just really important that they dot their I's and cross their T's and make sure that it's done right at this phase.
Yeah.
So we had a bunch of questions as well around healthcare access, gender affirming surgeries, what we can expect to see, particularly a question around the VA medical system allowing gender affirming surgeries and whether that's going to be happening anytime soon.
Does anybody actually know? I don't think anybody actually knows, but I think that'd be one of those, it's going to be a time thing. I know before the last administration, the VA hospitals were working with trans people because I got shocked. I would get calls from them asking how to trans patients. And I would be like, excuse me, who is this calling? And I'm sure Mara has more to add, or Shannon, or somebody on this on the call as well. But I was getting calls for care and asking for guidance from VA hospitals that were taking care of trans patients. So I assume that will be likely, considering the trans ban has been lifted under this administration. And you heard Sasha, she's probably not that direction on your screen, but she is on mine, say that what's happening, and I do believe they'll follow through with healthcare, given the two people that we have in office. You know, I worked with President Biden. It's hard not to say Vice President, but President Biden, I've worked with him. And I have seen Vice President Harris's work in California. And I know some people on this call have worked with her. And so I just think it's a no-brainer that we'll see that happen in this 4 years, if it can. We have to look at the things he has to face, though, in reality, with, you know, what's going on. And yeah, you know, but, you know, the VA hospitals were doing the work in many places. It was surprising, so.
Sasha, am I correct? You have a lawsuit against the VA, correct?
Yeah, well, actually, so the lawsuit was dismissed. So it's not active, you know, but we're pretty confident that the current VA secretary will move forward in a positive direction. They've already signaled that they're going to be looking into, it's a regulation that prohibits what they call gender alterations, which always sounds really weird to me. And they're going to review that, and they've asked, they sent it out in an email, I think, to the entire VA that's what they were reviewing at this point. So they haven't actually moved forward with any actual a policy change, but I know that Sparta and a number of other organizations are working hard on this to make sure it happens. So we likely won't be moving forward again with another legal challenge, hopefully. So I feel very confident that won't happen. I will say, with regard to the issue of healthcare generally, I think it is something that, you know, needs a lot more work. You know, I feel like it's a little bit like trans people. There's a lot of animus directed towards trans care specifically, you know, and a lot of misunderstanding about it and the medical necessity of it and the cost, especially. This is the thing that drives me crazy, is that the cost is de minimis, and anywhere it's been analyzed, and that includes the VA and the military, it's always been less than 0.1% of the budget for anybody that's covered the care. But yeah, I'm confident that the government will move forward with it. There's a lot of states that continue to exclude it, and there's work being done on that, but hopefully that'll move forward soon.
So we have a trans youth on the call. Thank you very much for being here. Who asked what general advice you would have for young trans person, especially where they don't have a lot of mentors, older trans people to have as role models.
Go ahead, Shannon. Shannon, you want to do it? Go ahead.
No, you go. I was just gonna tell you you're on mute. You go.
Oh, okay. Oh, you know, because I love talking to youth. You know, I was a college professor, and that's my favorite thing. And my youth still follow me. So, and I refuse to let them be over 35. So you could grow over 35. You'll always be a youth. And, you know, I didn't have a mentor because I grew up in a rural place, in a rural state. So I would encourage you to reach out, one, to any of us on this panel. And I never usually speak for people, but I know these people on this panel, and I know they all have a big heart. and they would be glad to mentor you, even though they're busier than hell. Pardon me, I wasn't supposed to use that, but including the host, but they would all be glad, including me, to mentor you. Okay, that's first. Secondly, there are groups that you can look for on Facebook, if you are, I don't know how old you are, that might be appropriate for you, that some of us can give you some guidance on. And I think that Genny might be helpful with that, just suggesting, or some of us would be glad to help you with that. If you want that type of support. Depends on what level of support you would like. And then we could connect you with some friends that might be peers also that are your age that would give you some peer support as well as adult support. Because I know one of the greatest things I ever did was go to a conference where I saw trans children, and I never had that opportunity, and it was the most beautiful thing in my life. And I cried my eyes out full of joy. And I want you to have that joy, to live your life as you want to, and with the support. And if you need help talking with your parents or doing that sort of thing, we can help provide you those resources through this call today. I know that. And anybody else here, jump in. This is not exclusive conversation. Mara or Shannon, I seen you, we have unmuted, and bless you, Mara. You're sneezing, but you had unmuted. So please jump on in this conversation. And Genny, please too, because all these people have big hearts on this call. So we are more than glad. I'm going to let Genny speak because I know Genny can tell you how to connect with us. And yes, and so that we can connect and not mess up confidentiality or do anything like that or put you on the spot. Because we would definitely want you to feel connected and loved and taken care of in the right way and the proper way. Okay. And I am very happy that you're on this call. So thank you for speaking up and being present. And Genny just sent their email address to you, so you can get a hold of any of us through Genny, okay? And anytime, anywhere, any day that you need support, we are all down for it. You see Mara's going yes, Shannon's nodding yes, and Sasha and Chris, thank you guys very much. Although I know I didn't need to thank them for you, okay? And I'm backing up, Genny, go right on in.
I was just going to say, we recognize we're running out of time here. I do want to get to one last question that a bunch of people raised, and what can someone do? Whether they're in a conservative state or in a blue state and want to help folks in conservative states that are battling these anti-trans bills, how can people best get involved and support the work for trans equality?
I can jump in quickly. So, you know, at this point, there are trans-led organizations all across the country. Like, I feel like any state you're in, any city, there is likely a trans-led organization, likely led by Black and brown trans people. So I would really encourage folks to go to the Trans Justice Funding Project. One, they're amazing and you should know about them, and they're resourcing so many grassroots trans organizations, but also they have mapped out trans organizations all across the country. So you can go to their site, you can look for your state or your city or your region, and you will most likely find a number of trans organizations there who are in need of all the support they can possibly get, donations, volunteers, just lifting up their work. So Trans Justice Funding Project, I'll drop it in the chat.
Other folks?
I mean, this is, you know, because of gerrymandering, a lot of the anti-trans and other negative bills that we're seeing as a result of gerrymandering. So, you know, to whatever extent people are able to, you know, to get involved, you know, with political work, but also most importantly to vote.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Kyler. Yeah, if I could also add, remember the whole breadth of things we've talked about here today, like ending immigration detention for trans people and fighting these bad bills in the states and passing the Equality Act and working to end mass incarceration. There's a lot of different things you can all be working on, and you ought to work on the one that's important to you. You'll be a lot better at it. You'll be a lot happier doing it. You'll build yourself up more. You'll build up your community more. So look for the one that really matters to you.
And I would agree with Mara. Pick something that you're comfortable, that's in your lane. You know, I tell people to start local, like Chris does. You know, start local. There's always something local that you can do. But, you know, if you haven't even met a trans person, I always tell people to start there. I just did a webinar right before this as a diversity training. And some people haven't started there, but, you know, you may be beyond that. But then definitely supporting, how can you get active with legislation? You know, write your local state people, your city council people, if there's something on the local level, your state representative, your state Senate person, your national people on the national level. You can call them, you know, letters work as well, emails as well. Continuing to bother them, build a relationship with them is what you really should do. Building a relationship is better than a one-time hit, because that's what changes them. Talking to the people in their office. You don't have to get them, because the people in their office are really the influencers to them. Get that sort of relationship going with your elected officials. We need you to do that. And if that's not your game, then donate money to some of these local nonprofits that are doing the work on the ground, or nationals, you know, but whatever is in your lane. And then there are all these issues that we're hitting that Mara has named, and that Sasha's named, and actually Chris named. You know, we have to reach outside. This community looks at only like one hit, and actually Americans do. This is my issue. My issue impacts so many things, like redistricting, voting rights, you know, all of those things impact us. And unless we connect those and bring other people to this table, we can't move anything. And Chris Hayashi said that earlier, and I'm saying that again. So yes, that's how we get Black people on. That's how we get Asian on board. That's how we get other people on board. Because if we're not fighting for their rights, they're not going to come over here and fight for us. And that's how we build coalition. So we got to do those things. And if you're part of that coalition and you're Black and they're talking about trans people, then you say, hey, don't do that. Why are you being transphobic? Challenge those thoughts. Do not allow that, because then that's how Black trans women get killed, because then you're sitting there talking smack with them and you don't believe that. Don't talk smack with them. Stop the smack. When I'm in the barbershop, the smack stops. I'm like, hey, what are you talking about? No, don't talk that way. Why? Then I tell them why. So do that. Challenge the assumptions. Be big. Own yourself.
I think we're out of time, but I wish we could all give you all a standing ovation and you could all hear us. So we just all have to privately do that in the privacy of our own homes. What a special and fantastic panel. I know everyone, based on the texts and emails I was seeing popping up, I really appreciated it. So I just want to let attendees know that you'll all receive links to the entries or the articles that were written by our panelists in the Encyclopedia, and also a really important reminder. So you will also get a link to register for the second in this series of events next Wednesday from 4 to 5:30 Eastern Time. Sage, Umass, and Clark University are also hosting another event, and that is on the state and the future of trans studies as a field. So you'll get a link to register for that. So I think we're out of time. What a success, what a lot to think about. So thank you very much. Genny, do you want to say anything?
Nope, just thank you all for being here, and come back next week.